Good day. Have you ever been let down, disappointed? Something has happened that has just sent you for a spin. You can't make sense out of it. You're hurt. You're puzzled by the circumstance and the context of it all. And so you feel deep within as if the bottom has just sort of fallen out. Let down. Paul the Apostle, in his last letter in the New Testament, 2 Timothy, gives a little hint that he's feeling that. He's going through it. His context is that he has been serving Christ. He has preached the gospel in many places, suffered many times from persecution, and now he's been sent to Rome, where he's in a prison, awaiting a full trial. He's already had some hearings, but it's not looking good. And as he feels so alone and so desperate in this kind of a situation, he makes some comments that, to me, give a suggestion that he's been very keenly disappointed in certain people because of their actions. For instance, he writes in the last chapter of 2 Timothy, Demas has forsaken me. He names a man who we don't have much on, but it sounds like he had been with Paul, supported him, worked with him. I'm not sure, but the point at this stage in Paul's life is that this man has bailed out. He's deserted me. I'm in jail. I'm facing trial, and it could end very, very badly. And Demas has decided to look after himself and run. Paul adds to that by saying, only Luke is with me. Now, Luke was the man who wrote the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts. And we read in the New Testament, he traveled a lot with Paul, was there supporting him. So Luke is still there. But the way he says it, only Luke is with me. Everybody else, in other words, has disappeared. And here's Luke. And that's all I've got left. Then he makes another comment. He names a man called Alexander. He said, he did me much harm. So not only has Demas left him, this other man, Alexander, has actually fought him, betrayed him, did him harm, whatever that was. And it leaves Paul reeling from the sting of it. And again, only Luke is now with him. And then he makes this very sad comment. At my first defense, in other words, my first hearing before the court, at my first defense, no one supported me, but all deserted me. Must be hard to be standing there facing opponents, and you have absolutely no one behind you. No one to advise, no one to support. Paul the Apostle did so much for so many, and then when he was in a situation, so few did so little for him. Disappointing. It's hard. Disappointment has a couple of aspects to it. One is the actual thing itself, where you feel let down, deserted, ignored, belittled, attacked. The thing that has happened has hit you hard. It's like a crosswind that blew you off course. And so whatever that thing is, you have to learn somehow to face it, deal with it, and survive it. For Paul, it was being arrested because he was a preacher of the gospel, finding opposition from those who did not want to hear the gospel. And now they've actually taken them into a court in Rome. So that's one aspect of disappointment, and we all have it. There are things that just go wrong. Not that we expected that to happen, but they hit us, and it hurts. But there's another side to disappointment that is even worse. It's not just that something happened to us, but usually it is linked to someone who was behind that thing. Not always, but most times I think that's the way it happens. It's someone who wasn't there, someone who left us, someone who gave a wrong spin on something that deeply affected us. We didn't receive what we expected. We were not treated fairly. We found ourselves alone. And so that someone is what really has stung us. There's a personal aspect to that, of course. It's usually someone that we know. It's someone who has, in their disappointment in how they treated us, have left us reeling Like, where are my friends? How come this is how I'm treated? And if it gets closer to actually being family, then that really hurts. It's personal. It leaves us wondering about ourselves. Is there something wrong with me? Why would this be done to me? Why would they do this? I can't understand it. And so our emotions are in absolute turmoil. It's hard to cope with it. It really is. And it's so often one-sided in that the person who has disappointed us sees it differently than we do. We look at this thing they did or didn't do. They look at our reaction and say, well, what's your problem? And maybe that is the disappointment, that they have no empathy, sympathy, no support for where we're at and what we're feeling. At the basis of a disappointment with some person, there is a relationship foundation. The relationship has been attacked or hurt, scarred. It has become troubled. And we are wondering, where are we at with them? Where do we go from here? Is this repairable? Do we now have to find a different relationship with someone else and this is done? And if so, then we will bear that scar for a long, long time. Everybody gets hit with disappointment sooner or later. It's going to happen. The very first man, Adam, and his wife Eve, feel their disappointment. They have two sons, Cain and Abel. It's been tough. They are out of the garden. Adam had failed and sinned against God, and now they're having a family, and everything from sin begins to make life go downhill. Cain and Abel come before God to offer a sacrifice of worship. Abel did it right and Cain did it wrong. However, all that worked out. But the point was that Cain got angry. The fact that God accepted Abel's sacrifice made Cain angry with God, but particularly with his brother. And so he began to build up in rage and anger. And interestingly, God intervenes and tries to stop him, redirect him, and it doesn't work. So Cain kills Abel. Think of the disappointment that Adam must have felt. He's lost a son because of another son. Then there's Moses. He had a sister called Miriam. She was the girl, remember, that watched over his little cradle that he was placed into in the Nile River. She was there when the princes of the Pharaoh discovered him. When he came back decades later to become the deliverer of Israel, she was part of the group, the crowd that went with him, rejoicing. She crossed the Red Sea with her brother Moses, and on the other side, she created this song, and you can read of it in the early books of the Bible, and she sang and rejoiced and led the women in dance and song that God had taken them out of Egypt, and a new day was dawning upon them. And then she got critical. She somehow crossed with Moses and became someone who publicly spoke against him. That hurts. That really must have disturbed Moses. And God dealt with her because of her public defiance of Moses' authority. He was disappointed, his very sister. And then I think of King David in the Old Testament. His son Absalom, whom he dearly loved, led a revolt. David fled for his life. Absalom wanted the crown and was prepared to kill his father to get it. Instead, he died himself in a battle that occurred, and David grieved greatly. Even Jesus has gone through disappointment. I think of so many things that happened to him. His brothers, his own brothers, did not believe in him. In fact, one episode in the gospel shows that they came and had some caustic words to say about him. And then we go from there to the neighbors in Nazareth. This is where Jesus grew up as a boy. He comes back later to deliver his message to them, and they rejected him. In fact, they wanted him dead. Then there were the disciples. Peter, think of Peter. Peter was such an interesting character, so exciting to be around. Unfortunately, he had a tendency to be high and then low and then high and then low, and that's Peter's personality. So he tells Jesus as they come close to the actual crucifixion, it doesn't matter if everybody else denies you. I don't care what everybody else does. If they turn against you, Jesus, you can count on me. I'm with you all the way. And he pulled a sword out and took a swipe at a man's head, which almost kind of like proves it, except when the chips were really down. And in the courtyard, Peter was accosted by some people. Are you also a disciple, a follower of Jesus? He denied it. He denied Jesus. Another disciple, Thomas, I think he was a thinker, because it seems that when he speaks, he's always asking questions that probe deeper. And when Jesus rose from the dead, Thomas noted it. That's how we most remember him. He said, I don't believe it until I can actually see him and feel him, to know that he's materially there, physically there. I won't accept it. And Jesus showed up and said, touch me. Here I am. I'm alive. You saw me die. You know I'm dead, but now I am alive. And Thomas immediately gave his allegiance to Jesus. But it must have been disappointing to hear those words come out of Thomas' mouth. I don't believe. And then there's Judas, another disciple who actually betrayed Jesus for money. All the disciples in other contexts in the Gospels misunderstood him. There were times Jesus expressed his frustration. Don't you understand? Don't you get it? He would say to them. Like, what have I got to do to get the point across to you? The Pharisees, they criticized him and always were calling for more. Give us more miracles. Prove yourself. And they had no intention of believing in him, no matter what he did. And there's one particular incident in the Gospel of John where it says that Jesus was teaching and he was going rather deeper in his content. And the crowd didn't like what they were hearing, and they packed up and left, one by one, and then group by group, and they walked until only the disciples were left. I've never yet preached where the whole congregation got up and walked out. I've had a few times when some people have walked out. Disappointing. And you have to ask, what's going on here? Why? What about you? Have you ever disappointed Jesus? Oh, I know you've been disappointed by others. But have you ever been a disappointment to others and to the Lord? We've got to deal with it, and Jesus did. So let me give you some suggestions, because you're going to get disappointed sooner or later along the way. First thing I want to suggest is that we must deal with it. Don't expect others who have disappointed you to initiate fixing it up. You're going to have to face it. They may not even know they disappointed you or care. So you've got to deal with your own heart, your own life, the situation, and your relationship with that person. You've got to resolve it to some point where it does not destroy you. So face it. Face the reality of it. Deal with it and face its reality. What did happen? How did it happen? And check the facts. Be sure you've got that right. You see, once our emotions get involved in something, sometimes we can't see clearly anymore. We just feel. And feelings can be very distorted. So put your feelings, don't deny them. They're real. But don't let your feelings control you. Put them on hold as you check things out, as you examine it. What did you do? What did they do? What really happened? And accept the fact, the reality that those who disappointed you probably have a different story. They see it differently. They understand it differently. And you need to hear that. You need to examine that, because maybe they have a point or maybe not. But at least get the facts and face those things. And if they have a different story, a different understanding, maybe there's some way you can repair this. And if it is not repairable, if it's too deep, if it is actually an unfairness, and they hold to it and it's just not going to end well, then ask God to give you grace to forgive. Now, I know that's hard. Why should I forgive them? They did wrong. Understand that forgiveness in this context is surrendering the whole situation to God and letting Him deal with it. Don't take revenge. The Bible says that's not, it's not what you should do. It's not an alternative course of action for you. Leave it with God. Place it in His hands. and move on. That's the big thing. Move on. If you can reconcile, move on together. And if you can't, move on. Move on in your life. Move on in God. Don't let that destroy you. It's not going to destroy the other person. Why should you be destroyed by it? Now, there's a nice ending to this. You see, Paul talks about how Demas forsook him, Alexander heard him, only Luke is with him. At his first trial, nobody showed up to support him. He expresses his disappointment. But he ends that book with another statement, and I like this one. He says, pick up Mark and bring him with you, for he is useful to me for service. Paul instructs Timothy, who's planning to come and see Paul. He says, I want you to pick up a young man called Mark and bring him to me because he's useful to me for service or ministry. You've got to know the background. You see, decades prior to this, Mark was a young man who had joined Paul on a missionary trip. Halfway on that trip, Mark deserted Paul. He packed up and went home. He didn't fulfill his duty. He was a disappointment. He didn't carry his part in this whole thing. His commitment, he broke it, and he disappeared and went. And Paul felt it very deeply because there was a conflict about Mark between Paul and Barnabas, a relative of Mark's. And the years had gone by. And now in his deep disappointment, as he's facing death, as people have left him, not supported him, he thinks of Mark, the man who so deeply disappointed him long ago. And he says, there's someone who can help me. Bring him. I need him. He won't let me down this time. You never know. The people who disappointed you might become the very people who later encourage you. Don't slam doors. Don't close things down. Keep your heart tender and soft, and be ready to let God work in the impossible situations in your life. God bless you.